I will say the biggest growth that I had and the biggest way that I was able to solidify the vision of the company is calling a spade a spade. We are a services company. That's what we're selling. So we're not trying to pretend that we're a SaaS company. Like there's a lot of companies doing like RevOps as a service. Sure. But isn't that just a retainer like law firms have been doing forever? I'm calling it what it is, but I'm still selling you hours and time, but ultimately it's still a service. I'm not trying to create a product. And my experience is people.
I'm really excited to talk to Jen Igartua today. She's the CEO of Go Nimbly, a RevOps consultancy, and one of the smartest RevOps people I know. Welcome to Grow and Tell, the show where revenue leaders tell the growth stories behind today's successful companies. I'm your host, Alex Krakov.
Grow and tell, grow and tell.
I met Jen back in my Lattice days. We were one of her first customers as we were building out our RevOps stack. This episode is a two-parter. First, we'll talk about what went into building her RevOps consultancy, including how they develop their service offerings, how they stay profitable, and how they recruit talent. Then we'll dive deep into RevOps, where Jen shares tips on building a RevOps roadmap, structuring a RevOps team, and picking your tool stack. She also has a really cool board game company, so we get into that near the end. And if we can ask a quick question before we get into the show, if you enjoy the conversation, please do us a favor and subscribe on YouTube or leave us a rating wherever you listen to podcasts. We really appreciate it. I hope you enjoy. Let's start today's conversation with the story of Go Nimbly. How did you end up building a RevOps consulting firm?
Oh my gosh, Alex, you were actually one of our first customers. So you saw me close to 10 years ago getting this off the ground. I have a pretty similar story to, I think, a lot of people who end up starting a services company. You do the work, you do the job for a long time. You realize that, hey, maybe I'm an expert here. Maybe my skill sets are needed. And I think that a lot of the times when you first start, especially a services company, you can start with a laptop. You could just like get your first couple of clients. So at first it was really glorified contracting. I got my first gig. I was able to start doing the work. It was me, hands on keyboard doing it. I would say for about 2 years, we were, a few of us just selling our time and executing on the work.
And how did you sort of think about like, what were those like initial products or services? Were you just like, hey, I'm Jen, I'm smart, I can help with marketing and RevOps? Or did you have like true offerings and kind of how did that kind of evolve?
It's so funny because I did, but they were useless. I was working at a company called Blue Wolf. They were the biggest Salesforce partners, and I was one of their first marketing automation hires. So I was there to start the team. Got really deep into Eloqua, Marketo, HubSpot. I knew those systems really well. I also got pretty obsessed with sales and marketing alignment. What is it about those two teams? They should be so aligned. It should be so easy, yet there's so much friction. And so I knew a lot about those kinds of problems. And I had a friend of mine who I think Ian Meesey, was working at Twilio, like with them, consulting on their sales ops side. And he knew they had marketing automation issues. So like I got my first client as Twilio, which is like obviously
pretty
huge.
Good.
Yeah. And so, I started building a business plan and tried to put up a website and started to create these like plans and, tiers, et cetera. And then realized that like, actually, no, they just needed flexibility. They just needed my time. Here's my hourly. And, whenever anybody comes to me saying, I want to start a, services company or fractional, I'm like, leave that. I don't think you should spend time on that. Go see what your customers need. It was a couple of years before we firmed up our offerings, like really understood how our customers wanted to consume us.
Gotcha. So in those super early days, it was just sort of asking the customer a lot of questions. What are your problems? Understanding that, and then saying, hey, here's an hourly rate where we can help you. And then did you like help in terms of strategy or execution? Were you actually getting a login to someone's Eloqua, Marketo, Salesforce and messing around in there? Or were you just talking at a high level? How did you sort of think about that?
It's both. I was, hired for a very specific problem. What Twilio had, which is crazy how successful they were, but they had like a lead leakage problem. Like they had leads coming into Eloqua and a few of them were not getting followed up quickly. And it was because of integration issues, et cetera. So I had like a very real problem to go in and solve that was, really obvious. That's always very helpful, right? Hey, I can fix that. I know how, here's my plan. And then once I got my foot in the door and got trust, I started elevating the conversation with things like, hey, I don't think the way that you're handing off leads to sales is working. you're not getting back to them. They wanted to do it in minutes. It's like, that's not happening. Is this an enablement problem? Is this a systems problem? And so I was able to elevate the conversation to the point that a couple years in, I was running workshops with them, and I was like really thinking about, what is your go-to-market, strategy here? What is your system strategy? And it blew up from there.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I feel like some of these like super high flying SaaS brands like are just a mess internally because they have such strong product market fit that like they didn't need to get good at operations. And I remember talking to someone, I think at Stripe, and I think what they told me, and hopefully I don't get this wrong, but like they didn't even have marketing automation. Their CRM was a disaster, but they were like 100 million in revenue, and it didn't matter because it was so strong, the product market fit. But yeah, it's interesting how you can kind of punt some of that foundational stuff.
Yeah, there's a gentleman, Jim Gearhart, that was in IT at Zendesk. And I was, he's super smart over at Gong now. And I remember him being like, yeah, we grew this fast in spite of our operations. Because, and that's not because they didn't invest in it. They had an amazing team and they had an amazing tech stack. But the problem is that when you grow really quickly, every time you double your company size, everything changes. If I have 10 reps versus 20 versus 40, all of my systems and all of my processes change, and you just don't have the time to fix those things. So you do some Band-Aids or you live with it. And so I do find sometimes the companies that have grown the fastest don't typically have the most amazing systems and architecture because they didn't have the time and they had to just, build what they could.
And as you've built up the firm, have you started to introduce like more defined products and services? And then, maybe we'll start there.
Yeah, for sure. It took a while. And I will say it has like COVID has, and, great resignation and, tech bubble and all that. It has changed how people want to consume. And so what I've found is it can be really frustrated where you create, a product, like a productized service. And then it, changes because your customers change. So I do change them quite often, and I'll know that in sales cycles. Obviously, people will bite or not. So pre-COVID, tons of workshops, right? Hey, let us go and do your lead to meeting workshop. Come through and we'll tell you what your gaps are. And people are less likely to want to invest in it now. It's more pinpointed. Can you increase the productivity of my reps? I have XYZ problem. It's a little bit less, when you've got less money, there's a little less find me problems and a little more, hey, come fix exactly this. So we've had to change, again. And, again, I think let me take a step back and say one thing. You might have a lot of your listeners be product people or services people or trying to do both. And I will say the biggest growth that I had and the biggest way that I was able to solidify the vision of the company is calling a spade a spade. Like, we are a services company. That's what we're selling. So we're not trying to pretend that we're a SaaS company. Like, there's a lot of companies doing like RevOps as a service. Sure. But isn't that just a retainer like law firms have been doing forever? Like, I'm calling it what it is. We actually call it fractional RevOps team because it's like you can get lots of skill sets, but I'm still selling you hours and time, sometimes deliverables. So sometimes we'll do X, but ultimately it's still a service. And I think once I was willing to look at that, I'm not trying to create a product. And my experience is people.
Yeah. It's so funny how the industry goes through these like changes of people trying, productized services, whatever.
Sure.
I even think of this as like product-led growth. Isn't that just free trials? It's like LinkedIn and Twitter and all these things are like, here's a new thing. And it's like, no, it's the same thing. This is what lawyers have been doing forever. It's called a retainer. Like it's such a funny dynamic of like, I guess humans in general trying to just reinvent the old thing that already existed.
That's so funny you say that because I've been I've been repeating that this PLG, like I love it. Okay. Product-led growth is awesome. It's fun. And the projects are really fun, but it's not new. And I think that also that should help some people because I think that there was a surge of companies that were trying to solve the PLG problem, insert whatever problem you think that is, that went out of business. So like your Calixas and Correlated. And I think there's been a couple other ones. And, why is that? They're like, well, our TAM isn't big enough. And I look at that and I'm like, no, because you're trying to, there are some companies that don't call themselves PLG companies who are going to self-select out of that are. Twilio had go ahead and log into your API and use, like you could just put in your credit card and start using it. Zendesk has had a free trial for over 10 years and it was like a free to paid, flow. And so we've been doing this for a long time. And now we're pretending that it's something new. So I'm hoping that it just kind of calms down and we look at it as what it is, which is just another motion.
Yep. No, it totally makes sense. And some of it is just like branding, I think, of like a new way to do something. And yeah, I mean, I think those PLG platforms are somewhat interesting, but it's like, can't you just use your CRM? I mean, I even think of that as like the CS platforms, gain sites, whatever, I'm sure they are very helpful, but it's like, you can do this in your CRM too, if you just instrument it. So I definitely will get into that more a little bit later, but I still want to talk about Go Nimbly. Like, how have you thought about defining your own ICP? I mean, is it easy? Is it just SaaS companies who use Salesforce and like Go systems, or is it use case based? How do you think about who's your target customer?
Yeah, it's pretty simple. So it's funny, we don't look at just tools because we have plenty of customers in HubSpot. We used to say mid-market and up SaaS companies with Salesforce was like, kind of our core. And then, we excluded HubSpot. Actually, we used HubSpot and we love it, but because it just wasn't scaling and it wasn't getting to the customers that we had. But now it's inching up and it's starting to be real. I'm considering doing a deeper partnership with them because customers are staying on. So I think, Salesforce is definitely looking in the rearview mirror and being, a little bit worried. So yeah, I look at that. And then depending on the size of the company, I'm either, directly targeting a director of RevOps or VP of RevOps, CRO. And for smaller, like not quite mid-market, but inching up, sometimes it's C-level that comes in and wants to have these conversations.
How do you think about like the growth of the firm? Because I think one of the hard parts about service businesses is resource planning and talent and hours and management. I mean, I started my career working at an agency and I can't imagine, like, it's so hard. You're either over-resourced, under-resourced. And I feel like there's a sweet spot of a firm too, where you're big enough, but not too big. How do you think about kind of that puzzle? You're
cool if I nerd out on services right now?
Yeah, please.
That's awesome because this is the first podcast that lets me. Okay. So I think about it in, I'll tell you this. When I started, I had in my mind, I want 1,000-person company. I want to build an IBM or a McKinsey, and I'm just going to grow and grow. And I was really thinking number of employees. Like that was really huge. We were not immune to the growth at all costs. Like we were running this business, sometimes not making money. And that's like the calling yourself what it is and looking at yourself in the mirror. Like services is a margin-based business. We got to make money every month. And like we should be looking at our EBITDA, and those numbers are really important. So I had a moment where I really looked at what I want, and what I want is a healthy business that can pay its people well. And that, like, more than anything else, I always say this, that treats its employees like adults. Like that's something that really wakes me up every morning. Like I love doing innovative work for our clients, and it's amazing the SaaS companies that we get to work with, but also I want the people that work at my company to, be thinking about, hey, I'm really well respected here. And as I look at, how do I grow this company, you're talking about bench. Bench is the thing that puts services companies out of business. If I overhire 5 people and then, my contract ends and now I've got 5 people on the bench and they're each making $100K, like I can't afford that, right? It ends up being, what did I say? That I say $5,000 to $50,000, of just money gone. And it's very hard to restaff people internally. There's not as much it's very difficult to do that. But you also can't sell and expand business if you don't have a bench. You will find not only is it hard as a salesperson, you will also find that your consultants will not pitch new projects to your clients because they're scared about staffing it, right? They're thinking like, I'm going to have to do it, or like, we're going to, mess this up. And so you need to find this like happy medium, and depending on your size, it sort of scales, but you need a percentage of bench. Our investment in Latin America has really helped that because we don't have like the huge inflated salaries that we have in the US.
Gotcha. Really interesting. When you're talking about the bench, I'm thinking back, I used to live with, a Deloitte consultant who sat on the bench for a while and all that stuff. And it's the best when you're on the bench, as long as you get to keep your job. Yeah.
Totally. Imagine just sitting there for 3 months being like, I don't have a project yet. And they're fine with it. Yeah. It's crazy.
Oh yeah. Consultant life is funny. He lived in San Francisco, but worked in New York, and every Sunday night would fly and he would, put on his pajamas. Shout out Max. Yeah. Very funny memory. Yeah. Insane. Yeah. And so, okay. So you mentioned the Latin American talent there. That's interesting. So yeah, how do you think about the talent side of things? Like, is it all internal FTE employees? Do you use contractors? And how do you sort of make sure it's like high quality talent too? Because you're ultimately selling people's brains to somebody. Yeah.
I have an incredible recruiting team, truly out of this world. They're just incredible sourcers. And there is just something very magical that people have about having an interview and really seeing that somebody is like up for the task and capable. And Kyle Lacey is our head of people ops, and he is a huge reason as to why we bring really incredible talent. Obviously, we send take home tests and lots of interviews, and they know how to do it, but he also just has a pulse on it. So we have really incredible recruiting talent. So that's been amazing. And then when we think about, you asked me about full-time. Most people are like 90% of my team is full-time. And we have a little bit of contractor, but it tends to be specialists. So say a NetSuite specialist. I don't need that person full-time, but we've got enough contractors that we bring them in. So we have a pretty good network of specialists. And then there's some, oh my gosh, I think it was Jason Lemkin. And if it wasn't him, then I'm going to give him the credit. I was at Pavilion's CEO Summit, and I think it was him or somebody spoke about senior talent in the US. And this is going to sound a little like crotchety CEO sitting in their throne, but stay with me. There is something that happened to us culturally that didn't happen to other countries, where we did have this moment of just like a ton of money, really insane salaries, and quite frankly, not super high expectations. Like we were coasting. And nobody could tell because money was flowing and it didn't matter and stocks were up and life was good. And as that's changed and it's like kind of brought back to, okay, everybody's got harder jobs. It's like do more with less. I don't think people should spend nights and weekends doing their, like, go have fun, go have other side hustles. I have them. But I think that there is something that we do need to right size. Like, work is work and like accountability is real and margin is real and productivity is real. And so I do think that like there is a little bit of disillusionment going on. And I think it's pretty senior. It's at like the director level that, they don't want to do the work. They want to direct, but teams are smaller. What do you do? And I am finding that the amount of, for lack of a better word, vibes that are coming from our LATAM hires are amazing because they didn't go through that. Like this just feels normal and nobody has to be like, oh shoot, work is harder.
100% agree. Amen. We've hired internationally at Doc, and I'd say our international employees work so hard, are so committed, so fortunate to be, working with us, and they have been awesome. And yeah, I think what you're talking about is too, just like there's you grow up in your career wanting to be a manager and like leading a team and all that stuff. And like, I got to do that at Lattice, which is cool. Totally. But like the fun part is actually the work. Like the fun part is rolling up your sleeves and doing things. And honestly, people management is like the least fun things, talking about salaries and whatever. Like that's like the least fun thing. So yeah, hopefully that's a big shift that kind of happens in the future as people start to realize that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. I'd love to switch gears completely and just start nerding out about revenue operations, your wealth of knowledge here. So let's start with like the basics. What's the definition of RevOps? Like, how did that term come to be, and how do you think about that definition?
Okay, I'm going to answer you in like 5 different ways. I think first, we were, again, people were doing RevOps before there was a term for it, right? Some of the best companies were doing that. And when we first started Go Nimbly, we taglined it, unifying the business stack, because we didn't have the words for RevOps. And what we were really focused on was breaking down whatever silos you could insert. There's a lot of emphasis right now on people silos when you read about revenue operations, but it's not just that. It's integrations that aren't all the way there. It's products that are not, it's data structures and integrations that aren't working. It's definitely people, but it's also terms. It's like one team calls something leads and the other team calls it different. It's all this kind of what I call internal bullshit that gets in the way of your customer's experience and how they can interact with you. So if we flip it and do a metaphor, let's say we're making a movie and we've got directors and we've got actors, right? Our actors are our go-to-market team. They're the ones that are creating the experience for the audience, and they're the ones that are interacting with the audience. Well, the everybody in the background, that's RevOps, right? We've got directors, we've got people writing scripts, we've got folks making sure that they're well set up, we've got the scenes, we've got, I don't know enough about movies, but I think you get the gist. We're setting it up, right? And we're just making sure that the go-to-market team or the actors can show up and create that really great experience. So that shows up in a lot of ways. But I think the key thing here is we don't want one team worrying about sales and one team worrying about marketing and one team worried about CS, because ultimately that's not how the customer interacts with you. If you don't have anybody worried about all of it, then you have all the handoff problems that you've probably seen between marketing and SDRs and SDRs and AEs and AEs and CSMs, where the customer goes, why am I repeating myself? So like, that's the stuff that we're really obsessing about fixing.
I really love that movie analogy. It's really, that's a good one. How do you
Little
think
clunky, but
no, it was good. It's like a good way to think about kind of the distinction there. Like, what are those key functions of a RevOps team? Like if keep going with the movie analogy, if you have people writing script and directing and whatever, like what does that look like for a RevOps team? What are those kind of like key functions? I don't know if you think of it as a function or a goal, but yeah, how do you break that down for us?
Okay, this is where I'll say there is theory and there is, how it actually plays out. And so let's talk a little theory and say there are capabilities that we expect from a RevOps team. And that is sort of operations and strategy. There's enablement. There's technical, the actual tools work. And so you can think about those. Sometimes when you're big enough, you have different departments even within RevOps that are doing that, right? You have your tools or your systems team, and you have your enabled team. Sometimes you even have your strategy and operations team that are separate. And you can think about it like that. I've also seen companies that this might seem against RevOps, but I don't really care if you also split it instead of function by funnel. Like it's okay if you still have folks that are focused on marketing, sales, and CS, as long as they're rolling up to a leader and rolling up to a team that cares about making it all holistic and that they're meeting often and doing the work together. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be that, and there's pros and cons to both structure. If you can think about the ones that are, marketing, sales, CS, they tend to have more depth. They tend to be closer to the go-to-market teams. They didn't have that relationship stays closer, but they tend to have less specialty in things like BI and analytics. That's the other team I forgot. They tend to like not go in depth as much there. So, there's how does this team work and what am I looking for? I actually borrow a lot from other teams. So if we think about you probably have a lot of people in here that are product teams. It's like, all right, great. Does this RevOps team have a roadmap? And like often the answer is no. And product teams know it's really hard to keep up a roadmap. Like it just is. It becomes stale really quickly. But I think that is so key to knowing how to structure your team. If your roadmap is a lot of tactical tools, then great. A lot of analysts. If RevOps isn't owning analytics, which I think they should, but if they're not owning analytics, and if they're maybe not even owning systems, then great. I don't need to hire those functions. If you don't have any big hairy project coming up in the next year, I don't have to hire architects. And so I think sometimes we try to make this like one size fits all when I think about like how do you set up a RevOps team. But if you don't know what you're building for, and I don't have an outcome or a roadmap, then I can't tell you who to hire and how to structure that. So I leave it a little bit more ambiguous than, I don't know, if you go read my content, we're pretty strong with it, but having lived it and like having been in different companies, it looks different at all of our customers. And we don't go in and say, hey, this is exactly how you have to do it. We mitigate any choice that they've made. Every system has, its downfall.
And when you think about that roadmap, because I think that was a really interesting point, like how should a RevOps team go about doing that? And like, who is the RevOps team's customer? Is it the customer, or is it sales, marketing? How should they go about that problem? Yeah.
Wow. 2 rants about to start. Okay. We'll do roadmap and then we'll do customer. When I think about, how to build a roadmap for RevOps, I'll tell you how it typically goes and why that's bad. Typically, somebody's got a document somewhere with a bunch of asks, and it's like, okay, it's time to go put it in an artifact. And they go and they document all that. And then plenty of times they bring their stakeholders and themselves, and they have a really fun meeting where they brainstorm more projects. And then they put a bunch more, as if we didn't have enough work, let's all brainstorm more work that we could try to figure out. And then you typically put it into like, all right, let's do level of effort and impact, try to plot it and try to go from there. If you've ever done that exercise, all the consultants are like, yeah, we've played that game. Great. What do you get? You get like 2 low hanging fruits of high impact, low effort. Cool. We'll do those. And then a bunch of high effort, low impact. We'll get rid of those. And then you're pretty much left with like a few in like low impact, what is left?
High impact, high effort.
High impact, high effort. That's where they all are. It's like every ask that we have is like there. And then there's some that like, start teetering down. So that doesn't really help us. We end up with like, great, we can do 2 out of these like 25 that we brainstormed. So instead, and this is like design thinking principles and product teams are very good at this and we should borrow this more, but it's like, what are we solving for? Like, what's the actual gap that we're in? How can we be like gap first thinkers and say, hey, I looked at our analytics, or I interviewed our customers, or I did rep rides, and I found out that our biggest issue is that, we're not getting back to leads within a day and sometimes 3 days, and our competitors are getting there first. So great. I don't have a bunch of like projects. I have one initiative, which is to have all leads followed up within 2 hours. I can go build a bunch of, it could be tools, it could be training, it could be whatever. And what I find is most people don't have that thing that they're anchoring on. Their roadmap looks like implement Gong, create XYZ dashboard, implement CPQ. And it just looks like those projects. It doesn't have the story back. And that's what makes, RevOps teams feel tactical. That's what makes them feel like support functions, because they're not telling you a story. They're not really telling you what their impact is.
And do you base that all around the funnel? Like, is RevOps the master of the funnel? And then you kind of just look at the funnel, you're diagnosing these issues, and then you build the roadmap around that. Is that the right way to think about it?
That's one of the biggest categories. Then the other one is supporting kind of big strategic moves. So some of them might be, all right, we're now implementing a PLG function. That's going to have a whole lot of work that wasn't, part of our old funnel. It's like new features. And, there's sometimes annoying work, like I have to go and deprecate a bunch of things that are getting in the way, a bunch of tech debt. There's like, architectural work like that has to happen that is not fun for anyone. And there's probably a few other categories of just like, ongoing enhancements for rep productivity, for example.
And then I'm going to stay with the funnel a second, then we'll get back to the customer question. Like, should RevOps own a funnel meeting? Like, is that a thing that should be happening, where there's this funnel meeting that's happening at a company, you're diagnosing these issues that goes into the roadmap? Like, we try to do something like that at Lattice. That's why I'm curious if that was kind of what you see a lot or no.
They should at least own a section of that meeting. So I do think that ultimately, if RevOps is not rolling up to a leader that is essentially telling them exactly what to do, and they have a leader that's allowing them to break down basically the silos that we're saying we're able to, then RevOps should be joining these funnel meetings, whatever that might look like, sales and marketing alignment meetings or go-to-market meetings, and coming there with insights and basically being able to say, all right, friends, here are all the analytics that you asked about. Here's what's going on in the funnel. Here's what we think you need to do next. And then the other type of big thing that RevOps does is we need to be bringing decisions to the team about what's priority and what's not. So again, we typically have a really long backlog. What are we working on? Because if we ask, our sales leader, marketing leader, CS leader, we're going to get 3 different answers. So a lot of times we are that team that's kind of bringing that cohesion.
So that's a good segue. Who's the customer? Is it the sales?
Yeah.
Is it marketing? Who is it?
Great. I love it. I don't like using the word customer, because I think it muddies the waters. Our customer is the same. Like, we have one customer. Our customer is the customer. And so I try to keep that language really clear, where I can have stakeholders and I can have users. And so it's still really important that I'm ultimately building a go-to-market platform. Like, that's what I'm building. I'm just building it on Salesforce and HubSpot and other things. But my job as RevOps is to create the processes and tooling so that my go-to-market team can be really successful. I'm building them a product. And so, they're my user, right? Like, if I really think about it like that, like, great, my user, what do they need, et cetera. But, the same way that Asana doesn't talk about how they are making you track tasks better, they're helping you get more projects done and achieve success. It's like, well, we are essentially, of course, we're helping the go-to-market team execute their tasks, but we're doing that on behalf of the customer, right? So that we can maximize revenue, so that we can make their sales cycles better, so that when they interact with us, we have the right answers. We're not repeating questions. We're getting you documentation and contracts, et cetera, really quickly. And so, in some ways, like if I really, back myself into a corner, like our go-to-market team are our customers. They are the ones using what we deliver, but we can't lose sight of the fact that, our customers are our customers.
All right. I'd love to switch gears and talk about software systems, which is a big part of RevOps and something near and dear to my heart as I'm building stuff in RevOps land. So I'm curious if you're taking a lot of different things. And so we'll go through a bunch of different questions here. I think the first interesting one is the CRM still the center of your RevOps tech stack, or is it a data warehouse? Like, where's the system of record these days?
Have you been stalking me?
I did my research.
You really set me up with this one. No, it's not. So when I started my career, we definitely would go into meetings and we would get in a whiteboard and we would draw one big circle in the middle and we would write Salesforce in it, right? And one view of the customer. I think that was always like Salesforce's tagline, right? It's like one view of the customer. Now it's the AI CRM. So we've got like one view of the customer right in the middle, and then we would integrate the tools with Salesforce so that if I needed usage information for my marketing campaign, I needed product to push that into Salesforce. So I would have my, last login date or feature XYZ activated date. And then that would flow into my marketing automation and we would use it there. If I needed to do any kind of like big reporting, I would do it out of Salesforce. Then you had tools on top of that, that kind of changed. But I would say in the last couple of years, and I think we're early on this, right? So if anybody listening is going, I haven't done this yet, just know should be on your radar for the next couple of years. But Snowflake is the winner here. But Snowflake is now that data warehouse that's in the center. And the idea is that we're using reverse ETL tools and other integration tools to move data from the warehouse to the places that it needs to be. And we don't need every piece of data in every single tool. We should just be pushing the ones that are relevant into each tool, because at the end of the day, Salesforce is not a very good data warehouse and a very expensive one. So let's, take that away, put it in a place that makes the most sense so that we can have one data warehouse that has marketing interactions, CS interactions, product interactions, intent data, whatever else. That's where we're doing all of that sort of insights and reporting.
And when's the right time for a company to start investing in a data warehouse? Like transparently, we haven't done this yet at Doc, and it's something I've been feeling and thinking about. And so, like how do you sort of think about that decision? And even you mentioned Snowflake, it's overwhelming. There's so many tools and we have a product database, but how should a startup think through this?
Sure. I think that's ever changing. If you would have asked me a year or two ago, I'd be like, nah, you guys are too small. Don't worry about it. Like it's for the big shots. And that's because it was hard, right? It was hard to implement and it was hard to manage and you needed to hire people. But there's tools, like Fivetran and Census and High Touch, and they're like, you can do it, right? You can go in there and you're not writing queries anymore that you had to do like a few years ago. You're going in and it's all like click and configure and you can do this. So skill set wise, anybody can do it. It is a cost, to manage it. And unless you're going to do anything interesting with it, it's like, why would you do it? Well, because you want to, sync your product data with your marketing automation, do really interesting campaigns, and you want to be able to do analytics on your opportunities based on usage and automate your CS workflows. But if you're not planning on doing any of that, you're probably too early, and just keep yourself focused. I think as an early business, that's the problem, is it's too many projects and too much distraction. So at the moment where you're trying to do that interesting stuff, that's when you should have that discussion. But you have the capability now.
And then when it comes to the CRM, so I think we both came up in a world where Salesforce was like the only answer, right? At Lattice, it would have been crazy to choose anything else, and HubSpot didn't work. But like at Doc now, I'm using HubSpot and it's been great and it's out of the box and it's nice. And so I'm curious how you think about that puzzle. Is it just like HubSpot works for down market SMB and at some point you grow out of it? And then, or is there certain companies you just need to use Salesforce right away? Like how should companies sort of think through that decision?
Yeah. So, great question. Here's what I would, I keep doing the same pattern. So I'm sorry. I'm like, I feel old now because I keep being like what it used to be, but I guess that's where I am in my career. I would have answered that question very quickly a few years back and say, you got to choose Salesforce. Might as well choose it early so you don't have to re-implement and just go. But HubSpot has done things like upgraded integrations, having custom objects, and ability to manage a lot more records. They now have marketing and sales and service and commerce. And so they are becoming this tool that allows you to do your work really quickly without a lot of customization and basically focus on, doing the work. Where they start to fail is anything super complicated. So they're not really winning enterprise, right? They're doing really well in SMB. And they're coming up on mid-market. Mid-market's staying on HubSpot longer. We are still doing migrations from HubSpot to Salesforce, but they're much later down the path. And, one of the main reasons, for example, is there's a limit and number, and don't quote me on the numbers, but there's a limit on the number of custom objects that you can have. And there's a limit in the number of records that you can have, within those custom objects. And there's not as much things that you can customize the UI, for example, or automate, certain types of records or certain types of quotes. But for example, here's a good example of why they're moving up market. Are you familiar with the company DealHub?
Yep.
So DealHub is, CPQ competitor. They integrate with HubSpot. So all of a sudden now HubSpot can do more complex pricing and quoting that it couldn't do a few years ago. So it's getting better. Now, it's not as easy to integrate, for example, product usage into Salesforce to automatically update your opportunities to be accurate. I don't know, stuff like that.
Yeah, the DealHub example is near and dear to my heart because we've been building similar stuff because competitive with them at Doc. Cool. And I think and we built into HubSpot line items and all of that stuff. And I think one observation I had was HubSpot natively can't really do like tiered and volume based pricing. But we could do it. And so it's like this funny way to like reverse engineer. All right, how do we fit that in their model and stuff? And I assume like eventually they build some of that stuff, but I found they do a good job of like getting V1 products that help a lot of things. But then, as you said, some of that advanced functionality, I assume they will build it, or maybe the ecosystem will build it like Doc. I don't know. It'll be interesting.
I don't know. I think it will be more of an like if we take Salesforce as an example, they're not even very good at pricing either. Like, they let the ecosystem do the innovation on top and they just stayed really flexible. It's interesting. I didn't really think of Doc and DealHub as like strict competitors. I'm sorry.
It's totally fine. No, I look up to them. Okay.
I named them as like one of the reasons why I think HubSpot was able to move up market. Like it's there without it. A lot of people would have self-selected out.
Yeah. So actually let's stay on CPQ and stuff for a second. Like, how do you think, when should a company invest in a proper CPQ system? And then how do you see this order form process evolve as companies scale? Yeah.
So this is another one where, all right, once Salesforce bought SteelBrick, that's CPQ, and they're an incredible machine, right? They're an incredible marketing machine as they're going down market. And so we're seeing younger and younger companies adopting something like a CPQ. And, it is a very complicated implementation. And you really have to be so good at your pricing and packaging and understand it thoroughly to the point where we actually we tried to do a CPQ implementation at Lattice. And I will say that was one of the hardest projects for Go Nimbly and probably one of our bigger failures. And everybody at Lattice knows that. Hopefully we cleaned it up and we did our best and we learned from it. And since then we've invested a ton in it because we had to, because all these companies were, adopting it earlier and earlier and our customers have it. And so we've had to really amp that up. But I'd say the real change too is that you've got, companies that are competing in that space and that it's no longer just CPQ, right? These cycles are becoming more competitive where we are seeing other vendors come through that are more focused on SaaS. You have to remember SteelBrick wasn't built for SaaS. It was it has like manufacturing terms in it.
My observation as I've been staring at so many order forms over the past year and trying to figure out Salesforce and stuff is that, I don't know, companies are so unwilling to like bend their pricing model to the software. And so you have to like configure your software. You have to have so many toggles and so many little options to solve for so many different edge cases. That's one set of problems. And then the other, actually, no, it's escaping now. But that is like the one set of problems that I've noticed a lot. Yeah.
But should they? You know what I mean?
Yeah, maybe not.
Should they bend their rules to what the software can do? I think the harder part is less that they're not willing to bend, but they're not willing to decide what their pricing model is, right? They want to customize. So it's like, well, I have an enterprise deal and they want us to do a percentage of price for the implementation fee. And it's like, okay, cool, but we didn't do that. So like, I don't want to create a new process for you to have that now. And so all of a sudden you have these teams that have blown up and have like 18 different pricing models. Partners have something different than, portfolio companies have something different. And that makes it very difficult to manage.
Yeah. Switching to a different part of the tech stack, like how do you think about customer success platforms? Like when's the right time to have one of those systems? Why do people even need a system like that?
Oh, do you need a system? It's a nicer UI. It gives, people in CS operations an ability to make changes. It's the same thing that you could argue, although Salesforce has never really tried to play in marketing automation, but it's the same thing that like, if you look at how marketers can go in and they can deploy campaigns and automation and workflows, and they can really manage a good chunk of their workflow without needing to go to RevOps or systems, et cetera. When you have all of your processes living in Salesforce, you can't do that. Like your teams are going to shut that down really quickly. So you can't add an extra pick list field. You can't add an extra workflow. And so I do think that these CS platforms unlock that for teams. It makes them more independent and makes them, more capable of doing their processes somewhere else. And it's just a sucky part of a CRM is that it gets locked down really quickly. That said, could you mimic a lot of what CS platforms do right in Salesforce? Yeah, I can track health scores and I can create QBR objects and implementation objects and I can do all of that. You just need, to ensure that you have coverage within the RevOps team to think about CS and CS operations, and then you can build it yourself.
And you mentioned health scores there, and maybe that opens up kind of a broader conversation around just scoring in general. So there's like customer health scores, then there's your MQL lead score, PQLs, right? All these different things. Like, should companies set up a scoring system? How should they go about doing that? What's your take on scoring systems?
I think that we've really messed up scoring. I think that I don't know. Whatever the theory ever was on scoring, it has been thrown out the window. So for marketers, the whole point of lead scoring, I'll tell you a story. GE was my first customer when I was at Blue Wolf. And I didn't just have GE. I had 20 business units. It was like energy and healthcare. And it was the same, we did the same lead scoring project over and over at each of those business units. And the meetings were really fun, right? We would go into a meeting. We would be like, how will we know that someone's ready, to talk to our sales team? Great. We'll look at their webinars and what they're doing online and their title and all this kind of stuff. And we will get the lead in the hands of the sales team at the right time. And that should increase conversion. Beautiful. We implemented. Everybody's so excited. And then pretty quickly, sales was like, hey, we need 20 more leads this week. Great. Well, we don't have time to deploy new campaigns and engage with them and send ads and do more webinars and do whatever it is that we're saying makes them ready. So instead we went from 100 to 80 score, and then we went from 80 to 70 and then over and over. And I wish I could tell you it was just one company, but this happened over and over and over. So lead scoring became a threshold management system. And it was like the way that we could feed the sales team. And the same thing is happening now with PQLs. And if you're not careful, you're going to kill PLG because you're going to have the sales team just call on every single lead as soon as they sign up for your product. So I don't know. We're not using it in, the best scientific way to try to truly identify when someone's ready for a conversation.
Yeah, it seems like a bunch of ways for revenue leaders, marketers, and I've been guilty of this too. It's like, oh, we hit our numbers. Look at the scores. We did it. We hit our numbers. And it's like, no, like, did it turn into revenue? Did it create pipeline? We should think about that a little bit more critically. Yeah, I made
100 MQLs. You want 120? No problem. Like, I don't really have to do anything except like send 68s now. So it isn't a model that works. In my opinion, it becomes, again, a threshold management problem. But there are new, like, people are implementing, and we did it over at Intercom, like real systems that are looking for signals that tell us that somebody's ready for them for an expansion. And I've seen really cool models of this happen. Like for Intercom, they have a product called Fin that's AI, and they will look at all customers, give me the customers that have thumbs up, that have really high number of conversations that they're having, and that the team is growing. So the number of conversations is growing month over month. Super easy. Yes, they need AI now because the volume says it. We're going to save them money. Life is good. And like, that's very cool. Like, in a way, it's scoring. It's just looking at usage and ICP and saying this person's ready. And I think that's what we need to change. I think we need to think about it like plays. Give me people that are this kind of person showing this kind of usage. That tells me they're ready, as opposed to a blanket score 5 points for every website visit.
I think we're moving towards a world of like a bundling in sales software. It seems like Gong, Clary, totally. Salesloft, ZoomInfo are all building each other's stuff. There's like this race going on. Like, how do you see all this playing out? And that's maybe a hard question, but like, or maybe a better question is like, how should people think through these decisions as a buyer? Because it's all merging and they're all similar, but yeah, it seems tricky.
No, I think that like everybody's scared. Like I was just on a call today with Chili Piper. They're launching their like distro product, and it's, you know, really pushing into lean data territory. And ZoomInfo has Ring Lead, and it's like, what's lean data gonna do? Like I'd be scared. I'd be thinking about who's gonna buy me. You know, same thing. I don't know. I'm not surprised that Drift got bought, because where the heck did it go? Right? It became a chatbot, and there's plenty of those. Everybody created one of those within their offering. And so, yeah, Gong now has a tool for sequencing, and, you know, that's encroaching on your outreaches and sales lofts who are also busy building Gong's capabilities, and Gong's building a forecasting tool. Great. What happens to Clary? If Clary's is still really amazing, but you know, what happens to these other products that are point solutions? And it's, some smart man whose name I don't remember said that like there's only two ways to make money: bundle and unbundle. Yep. Do you know that smart man? Or there is a man that was smart that said that. Yeah. And so yeah, we're in that, right? We're in the bundling, and then soon enough we'll start to get point solutions again. But AI, obviously, like if we're all going to be able to build point solutions with AI, I think that's like maybe the next, you know, horizon is we'll all be like, I don't need 6 of those features. I'll just build one myself. We'll see.
The other funny thing that's happening, and it reminds me of like what we were talking about earlier of like free trials, PLG, all that dynamic, is like the outbound landscape. I don't know if you see like year bound, all bound, like ever bound, all these like sayings. And it's like, isn't that just like first party triggers that you send an email to? Like we were doing that 5 years ago. Yeah. What's your take on outbound landscape?
I'll look at it in 2 angles. First, the angle of just like me as a human and you as a human, our inboxes are wild, right? My LinkedIn is wild. And it's actually, I'm really impressed by humans. It is amazing how quickly we can just look at an email and be like, sales delete. Like it's so fast. Like I use Superhuman because Superhuman rules. And the letter E is like what I used to delete. I'm telling you, it is like, it takes me a second. And so to break through the noise is like, yeah, well, you can't be at all noise because we're so good at figuring that out. And we're going to be just as good with AI. Like we're going to be just as good at figuring out that something is AI and automated. There's no way around it because we can tell when a human wrote it. I can even tell if a person writes me an email, even if it's not automated, I can tell it's a sales email and I'll delete it. So the pendulum basically needs to swing back. Because if you think about when marketing automation came, we started automating emails and messaging and sent that to marketing. And then the way to disrupt it, right, was we gave that to the hands of the sales team and they were able to do like sequences, which is honestly marketing. Like it is, it's just marketing messages. If they're not customizing and doing the research, et cetera. And a lot of sales teams are going into Salesforce, getting a lead and saying add to outreach, hitting the campaign, pressing save and calling it. Well, I'll just do that for you. Like, I don't need you to click those 3 buttons. I'll put it into the sequence. And so, you know, I think the pendulum needs to swing back where marketing is doing the warming up of leads, which is what we were supposed to do. And, you know, wait for sales teams to have leads that are a little more ready so that they can wow them with research and book that meeting and really start that sales cycle. So it needs to swing back for no other reason than your buyers aren't buying that way. I don't know, pick up the phone, do some social selling, something different.
Yeah. And it feels like the age of like the giant SDR team is a little bit over where it's like, okay, marketing can do this with AI and a bunch of other resources. And maybe there's still SDR teams for super enterprise sales or bespoke stuff. But yeah, it seems like not as big anymore.
I think the role is changing. I think I see 2 trends. One, I think we're going back to the 80s doing business on golf courses. Events are up. Like I'm flying around and going to events. I wasn't doing that 2 years ago. Like people are I think craving that human connection and they want to buy, you know, in person and through humans again. So I think that's going to influence the role of SDR and AEs. And if you're an AE, I heard recently a friend of mine who was saying that his sales team didn't want to travel. And I was like, all right, well, like there was a huge deal in New York and I was like, show up, go on site, like go say hello to these people. And then I think the other with PLG companies, I think the SDR needs to be more like highly trained on the actual platform. And they need to be a team that is just really focused on helping the customers reach that aha moment. So it's less about calling and saying, can I sell you? And more, hey, I noticed you were using Doc. Like you have I saw you were trying to do the integration. It seems to have failed twice. Can I hop on the phone and help you do that? Or, you know, like or I noticed you were doing X, other companies like you are doing it this way. Can I help you set it up in that way? And getting folks to adopt and spend more and becoming more, product specialists and adoption specialists as opposed to SDRs, that will turn into meetings.
I love that. I'm going to do that at Doc. That's
Cool.
what our SDR team will be like.
Great.
All right. I'd love to end today's conversation talking about your consumer business, Side Effects. What is Side Effects and how did you end up building this?
Do I have one nearby? I don't. What a terrible salesperson. So Side Effects was a hobby turned last year. We did more than $500,000. Wow. So like real business that we do in nights and weekends, 4 of us here in Brooklyn. So trying to figure out like how much I invest in this side hustle turned business. And we sell board games, like truly like $25 board games. If you want to buy one, pillboxgames.com, and you can use promo code PROMOCHODE because that's funny.
Love it. Love it.
And it's been really interesting trying to sell a consumer product and also selling, $20,000 services at the same time. And I had to learn some hard truths. I didn't know how to do it. After we were done building our first game, the manufacturing company told me that it was the most expensive card game they had ever made. And I was like, I don't think that's good, right? That's not good. And, it's because when you're talking in thousands of dollars all the time and somebody says for 20 cents, you could put gold foil on the box. 20 cents. Yeah. For 5 cents, you can make linen finish on the cards. 5 cents. Yeah. Add that. And all of a sudden, it was a game that's twice the amount of money that it should be. We since course corrected and brought it back, but it is really fun to make a physical product. It's just a very different marketing and selling motion.
What's the process like of like even making a board game? Because I don't know, I play a lot of Settlers of Catan, and like I always think of like what's the guy who Klaus, whatever, like his brain to come up with this idea and this puzzle. I mean, it like, is it just like you try make little prototypes, play with friends that go back? Like, how does that all kind of look?
Yeah. So there's definitely play testing, and you put it out and you try again and you make little tweaks. I will say one gentleman on my team, Jade, he really has a brain, built for, he's very good at like incentives and being like, well, the player will want to do X, or how do we make the player do that? How do we balance things out? Or if we play a game and it was too easy to win, what lever do we pull? And so it is like, and we'll create spreadsheets. Like we'll create spreadsheets with like number of cards, what they do, what they balance out, and make sure that it works really well. And so it is like a little bit of math, definitely then play testing and seeing that sometimes your math was wrong, and doing that over and over again. It's really fun what you can tweak too. Like sometimes we'll even change the winning condition completely. So it's definitely a whole lot of getting together and playing games and playing with strangers and seeing how they do it, watching people read your rules. That's fun, and be confused and be like, how can we change those?
And how do you think about growing this business? Is it all word of mouth, using TikTok, social media? How does this work?
So all of it. Mostly we're figuring it out. So we've definitely done where we've sent games to a bunch of influencers, and we've even gone small, like people with 2 to 10,000, person followings. At the end of the day, what does my game cost me? $5? I'll send a game to everyone. And a lot of these influencers are just trying to get free games. So like go big, send everybody a game. Life is good. And then we actually, some of it is really organic. The theme of our game, I think, gets a lot of people's attentions. So the theme's mental illness. You get an array of mental disorders, and you have to be the first to treat yourself with drugs and therapy. So a little dark humor on those commercials where you're trying to fix your restless leg syndrome, and then it tells you it could end in death. So it's, you're trying to cure yourself, but you get other side effects. So that alone gets people talking. Overnight, one time we had one TikToker pick up our game and do it, and we had thousands of sales in the morning. Like our inbox was just flooded.
That must be so fun.
So it's really fun, but we didn't know why. So we had to be like, what's happening? And like get online and try to figure out why we sold stuff. But really 90% of our sales are coming from Amazon and Barnes and Noble and hobby stores. And I don't really have much insight other than like raw numbers.
I love it. Yeah, you haven't gone full RevOps tech stack on it. You got to keep the side business fun too. Yeah,
no,
I guess you can't.
It's a very weird, very cagey, old school business. So you have a publisher and then a distributor and then the store that buys it. And the distributor won't tell the publisher anything, and the publisher can't tell us because they don't want like that feels like their data, right? I have no idea if I'm selling 1,000 games to one store or if I'm selling one game to 1,000 stores. I just have like the number.
So funny.
Yeah, it's
so
really
interesting.
crazy.
All right. And my last question, are you going to make more games or are you starting with just this? Yeah. Okay. Nice.
Totally. So we made side effects. We have a booster. We have another game called Mud. That's an election game. And then this year we're going live with a kids version of side effects that Target and Walmart are interested in. And then we also have a cult game, coming out a la Secret Hitler.
Very fun.
And you can play right now. We have like a Wordle game called Ampersandy. You can go to ampersandy.game and it's like a crossword Wordle type game.
Awesome. Well, really excited. I got to go play all of these. Thank you so much for the conversation today, Jen. This was really fun.
Super fun.
That's a wrap on another episode of Grow and Tell. If you enjoyed the show, subscribe to us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform, or find every episode at growandtellshow.com. I'm your host, Alex Krakov. Thank you for listening.